In Sri Lanka, they are rescuing victims of torrential rainfall in what is a nationwide disaster. Flash flooding and landslides killing over 400 here after a rare and simultaneous cluster of 3 tropical storms tore across Southeast Asia. The water out at sea is unusually warm due to man-made climate change, and that's helped trigger several unusually destructive cyclones with heavy rainfall. Even Colombo, the commercial capital, did not escape the worst floods in a decade.
In the night, things were normal. By next morning, everything was underwater, including our house. 7 of us, including children, took refuge on the top floor. There are another 15 adults still there. Their houses are completely underwater.
Sri Lanka's government has filmed its own rescue efforts with help from the Indian Air Force. But the scale of this disaster means that not everybody can be reached in time, and more than 15,000 homes have been destroyed.
As a country, we are facing the largest and most challenging natural disaster in our history. We also recognise that what we are undertaking is the most difficult rescue operation in our nation's history.
On the island of Sumatra in Indonesia, rivers burst their banks, and the water then submerged or swept away tens of thousands of homes. The death toll here, over 700, with hundreds of thousands more forced to flee. Abdul Ghani was told by neighbours that his house had disappeared, but he didn't believe it until he saw it for himself. He spent days crossing this mud-filled landscape, showing everyone a picture of Marsoni, his missing wife, hoping to find any trace of her so that he can hold a proper burial.
I just want my wife to be found, even if it's just a piece of her hand. As long as I can recognise her, that's enough.
In Thailand, they reckon they have seen the heaviest single event of rainfall in what may be hundreds of years, followed by days more of unrelenting downpours. Here, as elsewhere, public criticism of the government's response is mounting, with at least 180 dead. And across Southeast Asia, the effects of climate change are becoming an ever more urgent political issue. Joining me now is Roxy Matthew-Cole, who's a climate scientist at the Indian Institute for Tropical Meteorology. I wanted to ask you first, why the intensity of these storms, the fact that there have been 3 of them at the same time, huge amounts of rainfall, is this just an unusual combination of factors, or is there an trend to do with climate change?
Well, there are 3 storms, quite active during the last week in South Asia and Southeast Asia, and in terms of the intensity and the count of the number of these storms, this is not unusual. But the amount of water these storms carried is enormous, and that resulted in huge downpour in a short time, and that relates to global warming, resulting in oceans releasing huge amount of moisture into the atmosphere, and these storms capturing that moisture and pouring over Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, India and Sri Lanka we saw.
So the issue is not the number of storms. I think there have been 16 tropical storms in the Indian and Pacific Oceans so far this year. You're saying it's about the sheer quantity of rainfall?
Sheer quantity of rainfall, exactly, because these storms are about 50-60 kilometer per hour wind speed and maximum going up to 80 kilometer per hour. This is compared to category 4 or 5 storm cyclones, which is around 200, 240, 50 kilometer per hour cyclone. So these are very weak cyclones.
But it's a very political issue as well, isn't it? Because you've got the Sri Lankan president saying this is the worst disaster in our national history. But of course, you had the tsunami in 2004 in which, 30,000 people were killed? So in terms of death, yes, I mean, hundreds of people have been killed in Sri Lanka. But do you sense that politicians are almost trying to find their way through what could well become a very political issue?
Well, the tsunami was quite huge. You cannot compare with that anything. But post-tsunami, this would be in terms of the fatality, not in terms of the storm intensity, but the fatalities itself. It's one of the worst disasters in this region, I would say. And it's not that these storms were not predicted; they were predicted accurately, pretty much ahead, several days ahead, and tracked as well. But what we missed is the last mile link, because these storms resulted in cascading effects in terms of landslides and flash floods. And these kind of forecasts, from cyclone to cascading landslides and flash floods and evacuation in those regions, didn't happen properly.
You say that these storms could be predicted. Is it naive to think that perhaps people could have been moved away from riverbank areas, that there could have been more precautions taken? Or are we just talking about such poor parts of the world that actual disaster preparedness is really not possible?
Well, so far the disaster preparedness was in terms of the cyclone landfall, where the cyclone is hitting directly. But in the fringes of the cyclone, because it was carrying a lot of moisture, and these are regions where there is a lot of monsoon rain, so the regions were already wet and moist. So in those regions, it was not anticipated. There were no early warning systems to connect that to the landslides and the flash floods along the riverside.
But we should be preparing ourselves for more of this, shouldn't we? Because the temperature of the sea is unusually warm. That's not going to change anytime soon.
No, not for centuries. Actually, I'm in the
Centuries?
right now in the I'm in the IPCC meeting, and what the reports say is that more than 93% of the heat from global warming is absorbed by the oceans, and ocean has a long memory, and it is almost irreversible. So we need to cut down our emissions, because these kind of storms source their heat and moisture from the oceans, and they result in fatalities like this. So we need to be working on climate resilience, early warning systems, groundwork at local scales. That is quite important.
Dr. Cole, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
Thanks, Jonathan. It's a pleasure.